Good morning, and welcome to week 5 of these COVID-19 talks, week 5 of our lockdown practice period. I've been thinking, I said it to some people during the week, that I will give 19 of these talks, COVID-19. And I think this one is number 5. One of the things that we've been considering is that this is a practice period, or at least we can make it into a practice period. And in one of the conversations during the week, some of the differences came up. And one difference is that a practice period is for a given length of time, usually 2 months at Green Gulch, 90 days at Tassajara. This practice period is like life. It isn't determined when it will end. Another difference with the practice period is that people go on a practice period through their own volition. And we did not choose to be on this practice period. Well, actually we did. If we make it a practice period, we're choosing to be on this practice period. If we don't make it a practice period, we're not choosing to be on this practice period. But the lockdown is imposed from outside. We did not say, I'm going there to experience lockdown. So in that sense, it's very much like life. We don't know when it's going to end, and we didn't really choose to be here. So we can view life as a practice period or a succession of practice periods. And a practice period is where we pare things back to make practice easier, so that we can hone in or tune in or refine our practice. And then the parts where we're not on a practice period, that's where practice is more difficult, where we are faced with more challenges. So then to reverse our thinking, it's when we're not on a practice period that our practice is under more stress. It's under a greater challenge. So that is the practice period. And the actual parts that we call a practice period, they're the parts where we can relax into our practice, because it isn't under the same kind of difficulties or challenges that ordinary life or normal fast-paced, busy life presents to us. Or we can just see it as 2 different kinds of practice period. One in which the challenges are more yang, where we are busy, fast-paced, running around, doing things relentlessly. And the other is more yin-based, where we spend more time sitting still. That would be one way to look at it, like the front and back foot in walking, the leading foot and the supporting foot. The yang foot that goes forward, movement, and the yin foot that is anchored and supporting. So we're all in this practice period called life. And within that practice period, we engage in other practice periods, some of them chosen and some of them not. Sangha of the Western Buddhist order described death as enforced meditation. So maybe we can describe lockdown as enforced practice period, where we are somehow brought back to our senses. I can't help thinking that the animal world must be kind of shocked or stunned by the lack of human activity. What has happened to all those cars? What has happened to all those people that used to shop and fill the streets? Maybe they are enjoying a reprieve. Some of you that I spoke with are obviously experiencing practice period energy. One of the things in a practice period, because we have removed ourselves from the usual busyness of life, is that there is space, mental space, silent space for things to come up, things that we had not fully processed because we were going so fast. And in that space, there can also be a growing sensitivity. A sensitivity in the form of being sensitive to nature, being sensitive to your environment, a deepening of our appreciation for things. So you begin to see trees and clouds and even buildings and doors with new eyes, with purer eyes, no longer projecting our agenda onto the world, but seeing it as it is. This deepening appreciation for how we are all interdependent on each other, and how we are interdependent with nature. Without rivers and without trees, we cannot live. Without birds and insects and many animals, we cannot live. There is this whole vast interbeing, as Thich Nhat Hanh calls it, and interdependency, as Suzuki Roshi calls it. A practice period is a great time to begin to appreciate and see that interdependency. How we're connected with each other, but it's not just connected. We give life to each other. We give life to the world, and the world gives life to us. Another phrase is found more often in early Buddhism, conditioned co-arising. But I think the phrase interbeing and interdependency gets more to the heart of it. Interweaving is another phrase. Our lives are interwoven with each other, with our past, with the natural world, and with what we call the man-made world, or the human-made world. Interwoven, interconnected, interbeing, interdependency. The week gone by here at Ingen-ji has been like summer, and we are on the doorstep of summer. The weather has been sunny and warm, the birds singing and active. I don't know if I said last week that in my work shed, when moving some paint tins around, I stumbled upon a wren's nest. I think that may have been the week before last. And as I moved a paint tin, I heard a flutter and turned to see this brown blur heading out. I wasn't sure if it was a wren or a finch or something else, but later observation showed that it was a wren. And in the nest were 3 or 4, I can't remember which, 3 or 4 tiny eggs. And in another shed across from the house, which this shed only has 3 sides and I use for storing wood, firewood, blackbirds are nesting. So the wren's nest, well, I was a bit ambivalent about it. I thought, okay, will I be able to continue to work in the shed while the nest is there? And eventually I decided that's what I will do. Hopefully without disturbing the wrens too much and not spending too long a time in the shed. And fortunately the weather was good enough for me not to have to do that. So I only saw 1 chick in this nest, and it was amazing to see how fast it grew. I don't know what happened to the other eggs, but now the nest is empty. I read up on these wrens, and they can have 2 or 3 broods in a season. And they seldom use the same nest twice. So they've gone, it seems. And I don't know if they just moved to a different part of the shed or if they moved out to somewhere else. But in reading up to see how long they were going to be in my shed, I found out something. These little wrens, to the bird world, are little monsters. You may be familiar with the cuckoo's strategy, which is to get some other bird's nest, throw the eggs out, lay her own eggs, and then that other bird comes back and probably notices something is odd, but continues to sit on the eggs. And when they hatch, feeds them. So I'm thinking, at least with this cuckoo, the surrogate bird gets to fulfill its maternal instincts, sitting on the eggs, waiting for them to hatch, feeding the young, and then possibly being surprised that they don't look like me. Okay? The wren is not so kind. The wren, very territorial, visits other birds' nests and punctures the eggs. An outright vandal. So that mother bird comes back and just has broken eggs. Does not get to fulfill that instinct cycle. Still, the wrens are cute to look at. And I'm seeing more blackbirds on my fields around my house. So I'm thinking maybe their young have hatched and they are now out looking for their own food. And what a beautiful song they have. I think it was on Friday I heard the cuckoo. cuckoo. Beautiful sound. Beautiful to hear. And it beckons summer. So in this growing sensitivity of a practice period, where the sound at Tassajara, the sound of the river, the sight of the moon as it moves down towards the western hill, the stars, the trees, the squirrels, raccoons, surrounded by nature, becoming more sensitive to our interdependency. We can still be presented with difficulties. It is not all paradise, or perhaps it is, because even those difficulties occur in paradise. Difficulties of miscommunication. But our inner resources are such that it is much easier to deal with and cope with those difficulties. With all the zazen and practice, we are replenishing our practice energy. And that makes dealing with difficulties much easier. Another aspect at Tassajara practice period, as opposed to, say, Green Gulch practice period, is that you can begin to lose track of time. And I've heard one or two people saying that during this lockdown practice period. They're beginning to lose track of what day is it? What part of the month is it? And this can really happen at Tassajara as opposed to Green Gulch. So at Green Gulch there is a regularity that is to do with the day of the week. Sunday is a public day, so the public come in to Green Gulch and hear a public Dharma talk. And then there are questions and answers, and then there is the opportunity to have tea and buy cookies and bread, and then there is lunch. On Wednesdays, there is an evening Dharma talk, and that's really only for the community. On Mondays and Tuesdays, there may be a class or zazen. So you're either going to a class or you're going to zazen. Thursdays is a half-day sit. Friday is your day off. At Tassajara, you can easily not know what day of the week it is. The schedule does repeat, but it repeats according to the number of the day. So 4 and 9 days, that is the 4th of the month, the 9th of the month, the 14th, the 19th, the 24th, the 29th. those 4 and 9 days are your personal days. You have Zazen in the morning and Zazen in the nighttime, but what you do during the day is take care of your laundry, any personal things that need to be taken care of, go for a walk, get in some exercise, so forth. They're on 4 and 9 days. And so the other days are 1, 2, 3. 0, 1, 2, 3. So it's easy to not know what day of the week it is, or what week of the month it is. This, to some extent, makes it easier to just be with what is. And it's further, that experience is further accommodated by the fact that there is no need to wear a watch. There are temple sounds telling you where you need to be and what is going to happen. So after breakfast in the morning at Tassajara, there's a period of soji, or temple cleaning. And in that period of soji, you may be cleaning bathrooms, cleaning the zendo, helping out in the kitchen, or raking the gravel pathways. Various other tasks as well. One of the beautiful memories of soji is the sound of gravel being raked. And then soji ends with a bell. So it may interest you to know that losing track of time is not that uncommon. It turns out that Julius Caesar, well, when he returned from Gaul, he pursued Pompeo to Brindisi, and then from there, I think it was to Greece, and from there to Egypt. And Julius stayed at Egypt for a while, sending Mark Antony back to Rome to take care of the city. And after his sojourn in Egypt, he went back to Rome. And he found that, well, Mark Antony had not really stayed on top of things. And Rome was still in a kind of turbulent time and somewhat chaotic. So much so that they had lost track of time. He found that they were off by about 4 days. And so he redid the calendar, naming one of the months after himself, July. Things can turn. Things can change so abruptly. That's, I think, the meaning of a crisis, a turning point. You wake up one morning and it's a different world. Maybe you have a car accident, or maybe somebody that you love has a car accident. Or maybe you find that you're captain of a ship and you wake up one morning and there's a mutiny. I think it was my sister who recommended The Bounty on Netflix to me. And I said, oh, I think I saw that. And she said, no, it's a remake of Mutiny on the Bounty. Mutiny on the Bounty. So eventually I looked at it and read it, and it was actually remade in the 80s, so it's already an older movie. But it had Anthony Hopkins as Captain Bligh, so I decided to watch it. And I was so fascinated by the story that I looked it up on Wikipedia to see how true the film was to the true story, and it's quite accurate. The ship was bought by the Admiralty or the Navy for a specific purpose. And before they bought it, it had been built as a collier, transferring coal. So they bought this ship and gave Lieutenant Bligh the job to take this ship to Tahiti, pick up a supply of breadfruit, and transport the breadfruit to the Caribbean, where they thought it would be a good and cheap food supply for the slaves. So the ship was kind of small, and as ships go, it was the smaller of the Navy ships. And part of the crew accommodation was reformed to make it into a greenhouse for the plants that they would transplant. And that meant that there was a stronger sense of overcrowding because the actual quarters were smaller than they had been originally designed to be. So they took the ship to Tahiti, and they had to wait because they couldn't transport fully grown plants. And I don't know why they couldn't just transplant or transport seeds of the plants. But for some reason they wanted to transport saplings. So I had to wait for 5 months. And in that time, all the military discipline dissipated. And then they had to get back on board the ship and head off. And I think Lieutenant Bligh was finding it difficult to control people. And he became more authoritarian and disciplinarian as the weeks went by. And then he woke up one morning to find a mutiny. And he and most of his sympathizers were put on board the lifeboat or the launch that you use from going from the ship to shore. And they managed to navigate their way on that little boat back to safety. But how your world can be turned around so quickly. When I lived at Tassajara, we would get newspapers. I mean, they would be left out in the student area during the summer. And they were always at least a few days out. And I remember one story caught my eye. There was this young couple, their car broke down. And this is in the small hours of the morning. And a car with 3 men in it stopped to help. But as they were getting into the second car, they pushed the man back and drove off with his girlfriend. Such a shock. I never found out what happened after that. Can you imagine being in that situation? Being kidnapped. Watching your partner being kidnapped. What was their fate? How our world can be turned upside down. To emphasize this point, when I worked as an electrician, or rather as an apprentice, was one of the electricians, he would say good morning, but that was about all he would say. And then I heard from one of the other men the story about that electrician, how he was driving home from work and he saw that traffic had stopped and up ahead there had been an accident, and so he got out to see if he could help. And when he got up to the accident spot, it was his son who was killed in a road accident. I know that some of you are studying When Things Fall Apart by Pema Chodron. I haven't read the book, but the title to me says it all. In the words of, I think, David Kalupahana, who wrote Buddhist Philosophy, a historical analysis, said what the Buddha was teaching was not so much a metaphysical understanding of how the universe works, but how to cope with the vicissitudes of life. We are always living in a very perilous or precarious state. We can all be subject to a fatal accident any day of our life. We live in very cushioned environments. We get used to the regularity and the convenience of modern life, and we can easily feel removed from that precariousness. But that precariousness is always there, always in the background, and sometimes in the foreground. So Buddhist practice is not an attempt to deny that precariousness. And it is not an attempt to, assuage that precariousness. It's an attempt to face it squarely, to recognize and to see our own mortality, and to see how holding on to things causes us pain and suffering. There is an end to dukkha, an end to this dissatisfaction that we have. And we reach that end through not self-clinging or non-clinging to self. And how do we do that? How do we end this self-clinging? That is the Noble Eightfold Path. And it so happens that when we do stop this self-clinging, we see our interdependency. We see how we fit into the whole. This mutual reciprocating support. we see that grass, trees, walls, tiles, and pebbles all engage in Buddha activity. We develop an appreciation for the practice of the natural world, of nature. That we are part of it and it is part of us. Dogen. Grass, trees, walls, tiles, and pebbles all engage in Buddha activity. This material world is the manifestation of the Buddha, of emptiness. And we are all deeply interwoven and interconnected with it. There is a beautiful story of Dangshan, who set out on his spiritual quest, having heard that inanimate objects preach the Buddha Dharma. And eventually he made his way to, I think it was Yunyan. And he felt that he was getting close to the answer, to the resolution. And that Yunyan was the master who would be able to help him. So when eventually, the book says he stayed with Yunyan for a while. I don't think it says whether that while was weeks, months, or years. But eventually it was time for him to leave. And he felt that he had gained some understanding as to the meaning of inanimate objects preaching the Buddha Dharma. One way that he expressed it was to merge with suchness, you have to see with your ears and hear with your eyes. That's something worth dwelling upon. When you find yourself looking at something, ask yourself, what do I hear? When you find yourself listening to something, ask yourself, what do I see? we don't simply separate ourselves from the world. We do that. We see that there is the world and that I, or we, are in it. And in that, we see ourselves as separate from the world. But we also see that our senses are separate. Seeing is seeing, hearing is hearing, smelling is smelling, touching is touching. So when that separation breaks down, you're beginning to perceive the totality. In Spinoza's terminology, you're beginning to see God. For Spinoza, as per one of the previous talks, God is nature, or nature is God. When that separation breaks down, you're beginning to see things as it really is. You're no longer in the world of duality, but in the world of oneness. There's some wonderful teachings in the life of the Buddha. That attempt by Bhikkhu Nyanamoli to arrange all the early stories into some kind of biographical order. And one of those phrases is where the Buddha says, "This world is anguished." Note, he doesn't say you and I are anguished. He says, this world is anguished. For no matter upon which it conceives its conceits of self, the truth is always other than that which it conceives. So in describing it this way, it's clear that we are part of this, so much part of it that we are it. He doesn't say, I am anguished because I have these conceits of self. That process of conceiving conceits of self is a natural process. It is part of the natural world. This world is anguished, for no matter upon which it conceives its conceits of self, the truth is always other than that which it conceives. The world, whose being is to become other, is exposed to becoming, is committed to becoming, relishes only becoming. Yet what it relishes brings fear, and what it fears is pain. Now, this noble life is lived for the complete ending of, and choose your word at this point, fear, dukkha, suffering. So I like to play around a little bit with words in order to tease out their meaning. We have this idea, the world. So is he talking about the human world or the world at large? Is he talking about the world of human activity, or is he talking about nature? And I think he's talking about nature. Nature is anguished, being exposed to contact. Now, contact is one of the 12 links of samsara. 12 links of going round and round, rebirth after rebirth. How suffering arises. The 12 links, the 12 causal links or conditioned links for the arising of suffering. Contact is number 6. Between the 6 sense bases, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, mind, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and thought. Number 5, the 6 sense bases. 6, in dependence upon the 6 sense bases arises contact. In dependence upon contact arises feeling. And then from feeling, craving, becoming birth then gives rise to old age, disease, sickness and death, and lamentation, despair, and all that stuff. So nature is anguished, being exposed to contact. For no matter upon which it conceives its conceits of self, the truth is always other than that which it conceives. Nature, whose being is to become other, is exposed to becoming, is committed to becoming, relishes only becoming. Yet what it relishes brings fear, and what it fears is pain, or grief, we could say. Now, this noble life is lived for the complete cessation of dukkha. Sometimes nature in our language is referred to as she. And for Spinoza, nature is God. God. So, I don't like using the word God for the absolute or the word God for nature, because my feeling is we have inherited so much connotations, ideas about God and what God is, that we are likely to transpose those ideas onto nature or onto the absolute, or onto, as Kant would call it, the thing in itself, suchness. But this way kind of reverses that tendency. God is anguished, being exposed to contact. For no matter upon which she conceives her conceits of self, the truth is always other than that which God conceives. God, whose being is to become other, is exposed to becoming, is committed to becoming, relishes only becoming. Yet what she relishes brings fear, and what she fears is pain. Now this noble life is lived for the complete ending of fear. To fully immerse yourself in nature, to fully be one with nature, to become nature, to become present, and for the present to become you. I don't know where this phrase comes from, but it's from a Japanese Buddhist text, which I read in translation, but I don't know what it is. It says, when Buddha is in birth and death, there is no birth and death. When we stop or cease this clinging to a separate self, we are seamlessly and completely part of nature, part of this total being and this total becoming. So when Dang Shan was leaving Yunyan, he made his way out on foot because he did not have a car, and he was crossing a stream. And as he crossed the stream, he saw his reflection in the water. And he composed this verse. Now I see him everywhere. I am not now him, yet he is not other than myself. It must be understood in this way if one is to merge with suchness. Other translations use the word it instead of him. Now I see it everywhere. As Suzuki Roshi would say, seeing things as it is. Now I see it everywhere. I am not now it, yet it is no other than myself. It must be understood in this way if one is to merge with suchness. So I think the word him, giving it a pronoun, emerges from this sense of appreciation, an appreciation of the natural world and the world of things and objects. These objects, the knives, the bowls, the candles, the incense, as well as the trees, they're all interwoven with our life. Our life is different without them, not even possible without them in some form or other. And out of that sense of appreciation can arise a sense of affection and a sense of companionship. So I think giving it a pronoun is not entirely wrong. But I sometimes give it a different pronoun. She. Now I see her everywhere. I am not now her, yet she is no other than myself. It must be understood in this way if one is to merge with suchness. Thank you all very much.